Hello, everyone, and welcome, welcome, welcome. My name is Dorian Warren. I am the co-chair of the Economic Security Project, co-president at Community Change, and a big Dolly Parton fan. She gives great books to kids. Pro tip. So welcome, welcome, welcome to our webinar. I want to thank our partners, Economic Security Project, Community Change, and of course, the Shriver Center on Poverty Law. Welcome to each of you for joining us. Just to say at the top, we have a couple of goals for this event. One is to introduce our fantastic new report, Guaranteed Income, States Lead the Way in Reimagining the Social Safety Net, co-produced by Shriver and ESP. We also want to get you excited about guaranteed income, as well as to start building some connections and relationships amongst you to develop specific campaigns and policy ideas that you can implement in your states. We think, and we're going to make the argument, that guaranteed income is both good policy and good politics. So coming out of this, we think you'll have the information and the connections and the relationships to really jump into this fight with us. We encourage you to join the public conversation using the hashtag #CashStatesLead. And with that, we're going to hear a little bit from our dear friend and colleague, Professor Dr. Darrick Hamilton.
Sorry, I think we're just having a tiny bit of technical difficulty. Here we go.
It is such an honor to be here today as states lead the way towards economic justice. I am Darrick Hamilton. I am the director of the Institute on Race, Power, and Political Economy and a university professor at the New School. The current political discourse of our day is grounded in a rhetoric of freedom, choice, and a specific notion of rights. Not the economic rights of people, but the economic rights of property. This emphasis on property rights is devoid of an honest and sobering historical discourse of all the immoral practices by which that property has come to be distributed in the first place. In essence, what government is doing today is serving to codify and secure, protect accrued property when its fiduciary responsibility should always be, first and foremost, to serve its people. With that fiduciary responsibility, government has a responsibility to promote economic inclusion, civic engagement, and social equity, and do it in an intentionally anti-sexist and anti-racist way. That means intentionally being inclusive. At least since the 1970s, our economy has trended towards growing income and wealth disparity while wages have stagnated. And this COVID pandemic, if untreated, will amplify these disparities, particularly for Black and Brown communities. The physical and economic toll of COVID-19 vividly exposes and amplifies the human cost and structural inequities and unfairness that exist in our economy. But there's silver lining. This trend and despair need not be our destiny. During this pandemic, while facing a massive public health crisis and an economy on the brink of an economic depression, the United States Treasury, through the IRS, sent direct stimulus checks to protect American families and to lift 11.7 million families out of poverty. And this was done by direct cash. We saw firsthand that poverty is literally a policy choice. No one amplifies this more eloquently than the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King when he said it best. He said, quote, "I am now convinced that the simplest approach will prove to be the most effective. The solution to poverty is to abolish it directly by a now and widely discussed measure, the guaranteed income." We don't have to wait on federal action. We can build momentum and demand that state action works to ensure that there is a floor on income for which no one falls below, and we trend towards eliminating poverty. With Naomi Zodi serving as the lead author, my colleagues and I produced a paper recently on describing what a guaranteed income for the 21st century could look like. The proposal uses the tax code, the biggest and perhaps best fiscal tool at our disposal, to eliminate poverty and lift more families towards the middle class. The guaranteed income we propose lifts 14 million American families out of poverty by design. Not only does it eliminate poverty, it goes a long way towards building racial, ethnic, and gender justice. Importantly, our proposal is grounded in the values I described earlier of economic inclusion, civic engagement, and social equity. It calls for tax reform to prevent a generation of Americans from living in poverty and to promote greater economic parity and more justice around the tax code that right now is designed to benefit those at the top. This is necessary and important work, and I believe we have a path forward at the federal level. That said, I'm also keenly aware that the work will take time, and we don't have to wait. To support families now and to illuminate the path forwards, states can and must take the lead. While we build a federal guaranteed income, there's an opportunity for states to take this mantle and go forward. Last year, Washington, Oregon, California, Maine, New Jersey, and the District of Columbia all passed significant cash legislation that enables the use of guaranteed income. So whether we're expanding the tax code to ensure more people are not in poverty, or reforming the tax code so that more immigrant families, by way of filing an ITIN tax reform, also qualify, we can put more money directly in the hands of people so that they can have prosperity and economic growth. So thank you for joining us today to build power, to do the work on the ground that's necessary to provide a pathway to justice, eliminating poverty, and promoting economic prosperity for all Americans, not just those that are elite and fortunate enough to be born into elite families. Thank you.
Excellent. Can everybody see the slides there on the screen? Seeing thumbs up. What a great way to start us off. Thanks to Professor and Dr. Darrick Hamilton for putting a little gust of wind in all of our sails this afternoon and inspiring us with that great video. Hello, everyone. My name is Nolan Downey. I am a staff attorney for the Legal Impact Network at the Shriver Center on Poverty Law. And I'm very excited and grateful to be with all of you today to introduce the Shriver Center and the Economic Security Project's joint report, Guaranteed Income, States Lead the Way in Reimagining the Social Safety Net. Just some quick background on the Shriver Center. Based in Chicago, the Shriver Center is an unrestricted legal advocacy organization that fights for economic and racial justice. We litigate, shape policy, and train and convene multi-state networks of lawyers, community leaders, and activists nationwide, one of which is our Legal Impact Network, which is a collective of 36 state law and policy organizations from across 32 states and DC. And this network serves as both a space of shared learning for advocates across the country, but also a platform for collaborative multi-state advocacy. And one of the things that we're hoping will be a focus of some of that multi-state collaboration moving forward is guaranteed income. And our recently released report makes the case that right now, we have an opportunity to build on the tremendous body of work and the proof of concept that's been demonstrated by guaranteed income pilots across the country, and really begin to focus on scaling these concepts and pursuing bigger, permanent, publicly funded guaranteed income programs at the state level. And I want to be clear. We want a permanent federal guaranteed income. We need it. That's the ultimate goal. But throughout history, states have played the critical role of a proving ground for concepts that are later implemented federally. So states have an opportunity to really capitalize on the momentum that we're starting to see locally for a guaranteed income. Now, I want to spend just a little bit of time talking about what exactly we mean when we say guaranteed income. The term has been thrown around a lot already this afternoon, and I'm sure people have a general idea of what it looks like. But when we say guaranteed income, we're talking about something specific that has a few elements. First, it is cash payments. It's meant to be unconditional for eligible individuals, no strings attached, no work requirements, no restrictions on how that money can be spent. Importantly, guaranteed income supplements rather than replaces the existing social safety net. We want people to experience a net gain in overall household resources, not just replacing the resources that they get now with cash. And lastly, a guaranteed income is distinct from a universal basic income in that it is not universal. It prioritizes money for folks on the lower end of the income spectrum who need it most. Now, we firmly believe that this is good public policy. It promotes dignity. It gives people agency over their own lives. It presents an opportunity to really reimagine income supports and what they look like in this country. And importantly, it works. And I know people are going to be shocked by this, but it turns out that when folks on the lower end of the income spectrum have more cash, their lives get better in a myriad of ways. Evaluations of existing or completed programs show a wide range of benefits of guaranteed income. In addition to sort of the overall poverty reducing effects, we see that people have an increased ability to pay their bills and to save money. They have better access to medical care, better access to nutrition, to mental health services, to physical health services, stress relief. There are just, the list goes on. And we talk about some of these outcomes in more detail in the report. And in addition to those outcomes, we also spend some time in the report talking about how a state might actually implement a guaranteed income and the different mechanisms that may be available to get cash to the people who need it. So we talk a little bit about the idea of expanding a state earned income tax credit. And later on in the program, we're going to be hearing about some of the work that's happening in this space in Illinois. We talk about the idea of dividends from a sovereign wealth fund for folks who are on the call that are familiar with the Alaska Permanent Fund dividend, which is the longest standing example of a permanent publicly funded cash transfer at the state level. This is the model that they use. And then of course you can build a new program, and we go into some of the various considerations that could be at play there. A number of other things that we want advocates for these programs to be thinking about. We talk a little bit generally in the report about tactics for raising revenue, why guaranteed income is not just good policy, but also good politics. And then we spill a lot of ink on benefits protection. As we mentioned, guaranteed income is meant to supplement rather than replace the social safety net. So in addition to the actual implementation mechanism that a state might use, there are a handful of choice points in program design that are going to impact eligibility for other benefits like SNAP, Medicaid, and housing benefits. So we want folks who are pursuing these programs to really be thinking about those things. And then of course, we talk about some opportunities to promote racial equity and really reject the racist structures that define current benefits administration. So we hope that people will find the report helpful, and we hope that people will reach out if there's any way that they think that we can support them in pursuing substantial investments in guaranteed income programs in their community, like the one that we're very excited to talk about next, that is on the precipice of happening here in Cook County. And to talk about those efforts, it's now my pleasure to introduce Toni Preckwinkle, the president of the Cook County Board of Commissioners. As the first Black woman elected to this office, President Preckwinkle has held this position since 2010. A dedicated and effective public servant, President Preckwinkle has worked to transform county government through increased fiscal responsibility, transparency, and improved services. Among her many successes as the top executive of the nation's second most populous county, President Preckwinkle created the Bureau of Economic Development to lead and promote equitable economic growth and community development throughout the county. Throughout her tenure, promoting equity, and specifically racial equity, has been a critical principle of her leadership. Recently, President Preckwinkle announced a $42 million guaranteed income demonstration for Cook County. Now, beyond the sheer size of this investment, which, by the way, is the largest in the country to date, We're excited because the commitment has also been made to try to build this demonstration sustainably into a permanent program. So welcome, President Preckwinkle. Thank you for being with us this afternoon, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Nolan, for that kind introduction. And thanks to the Shriver Center, Community Change and Economic Security Project for inviting me to talk about why governments should champion guaranteed income and direct cash policies. I'd also like to take the opportunity to acknowledge and thank my fellow panelists and our host today. Darrick Hamilton, founding director of the Institute for the Study of Race, Power, and Political Economy at the New School. Dorian Warren, co-chair of the Economic Security Project. Sarah Kimberlin, senior policy analyst at California Budget and Policy Center. And Jenna Severson, communications and digital manager at Economic Security for Illinois. Finally, I'd like to thank Audra Wilson, president and CEO of the Shriver Center, for helping host this webinar. I'd like to note that Audra also serves as our chair of the Cook County Commission on Women's Issues, and I want to thank her for that service as well. Today, I'd like to tell you the story of how we came to embrace direct cash policies at Cook County, because I think it clearly shows why we need to move in this direction. When COVID-19 struck, our government was pushed to its limits. In April of 2020, the United States was experiencing the highest unemployment since the Great Depression in the 1930s, while also being in the middle of a global pandemic. The last global pandemic being 100 years ago, around the time of the First World War. And while both of these events impacted everyone, their impacts did not affect everyone equally. We saw that low-income communities of color experienced the worst health and economic results. We believed then and still believe now that these disparities were unacceptable. So we moved to act. We launched dozens of new COVID relief initiatives, including small business grants, support for local food pantries, housing assistance, and many more, all aimed at assisting our most vulnerable residents first and foremost. As part of this effort, we decided to create a small business emergency cash program to offer one-time $600 grants to low and moderate income suburban residents who'd lost their jobs or work hours due to the pandemic. While decades of research has shown the merits of direct cash programs, we wanted to be careful with our COVID response dollars and cautiously waded into this new territory. Being among the first of the large counties to implement such a pilot, we initially put $2 million into the program, which was enough to serve about 3,300 people. I want to note that from the very beginning, we noticed key differences between cash assistance and our other response programs. First, the cost to administer emergency cash was significantly less than our other initiatives. Some administrative costs for other programs reached 15% or more. The cost for the direct cash assistance program was just 4% of the overall fund, meaning that 96% of the dollars were going directly to our recipients. Secondly, we found it was much quicker and easier to launch and administer the emergency cash program compared to our other work. While some of our other initiatives took 4 or more months to implement, the emergency cash program was up and running in just 2 months. When we launched the program in the fall of 2020, public interest was beyond anything we had seen before. At the end of a 2-week application period, more than 20,000 people had applied. And when we looked at the applicant pool, it matched up remarkably well with the county's equitable distribution model that was created to target the resources to communities with the greatest need. With this information in hand, we decided we would do more. At that moment, we decided to quadruple the size of the fund. So it went from 2 million to 8 million. In the end, our emergency cash assistance program served nearly 14,000 of our residents. More than 75% of the recipients were people of color, 70% were female, and the median household income was $20,000. As a final note, our evaluation data pointed to the fact that the vast majority of the money was used to cover housing, food, transportation, and medical bills, all contrary to the welfare queen tropes that have long plagued our nation's safety net narratives. And we continued to assess the problems facing our most underserved residents, problems that were pre-existing before the pandemic struck. The root cause always came back to lack of resources. All the research shows that low-income people spend unrestricted money wisely, and that it leads to more financial stability, as well as improved physical and emotional and social outcomes. Yet historically, both public and private institutions have been unwilling to invest directly in low-income people without significant restrictions attached. The red tape in place is not because of any evidence that it's necessary, but rather because our society does not believe that people living in poverty have the character or the ability to make good decisions for themselves. To put it plainly, this paternalistic view is both inaccurate and unhelpful. Even worse, it shows a lack of respect for our residents based solely on the size of their bank accounts. The United States has long had a history of equating economic success or failure with an individual's hard work and talents alone, without any regard to the structural forces at play. However, we cannot solve the growing problems of entrenched poverty and income inequality if we refuse to acknowledge systemic factors such as family lineage, structural racism, and a lifetime of unequal access to financial resources. You heard a quote earlier from Martin Luther King. Let me give you another. It's a cruel jest to say to a bootless man that he ought to lift himself up by his own bootstraps. With the size and scale of problems we face in the 21st century, government leaders must challenge conventional wisdom, see situations clearly, and act on data to find success. Cook County's experience with the Emergency Cash Fund convinced me that there's a better way to address economic hardship, by directly giving cash to those who need it. In 2021, I started speaking out as a strong supporter of direct cash initiatives aimed at low and moderate income residents, like guaranteed income programs and efforts to expand tax credits, such as our own here in Illinois' newly enacted earned income tax credit that you'll hear more about in a few minutes from other presenters. On the county's part, I'm very excited to say that next month, Cook County will build on the success we've seen so far and launch our first guaranteed income pilot. The $42 million program, as you heard, is the nation's largest pilot to date. And while these numbers and figures are subject to change as we iron out our program details, our current plan will give $500 monthly payments to 3,250 Cook County residents over the course of 2 years. And while this is a pilot, we hope to institute a permanent guaranteed income program after our initial effort is completed. While we know that large-scale government programs, guaranteed income programs, will need to come from higher levels of government, that is the federal government, we hope that Cook County's experience and commitment will help lead the way. I'm heartened by the number of pilots being launched by local governments across the nation, and encourage governors and state legislators as well to support guaranteed income policies, as we've seen happen in California and elsewhere. In closing, while we're proud of what we've accomplished here in Cook County, we know there's a lot more work to be done. As we move forward, we'll carefully study the impacts of these initiatives, but we're confident that by focusing our investments where they'll be most impactful, by giving folks living in poverty what they need most, money, we will create lasting change here in Cook County. Thank you very much.
And thank you, President Preckwinkle. And I say this from the bottom of my heart. I am a Kenwood Academy alum, Cook County alum from the 6th Ward, but spent a lot of time in Hyde Park. And so just thank you. I used to see you in a grocery store too. So just thank you for your leadership. And just know that you have a national movement around you that is supporting your bold championing of this idea. So just a lot of gratitude for your leadership here nationally on this effort around guaranteed income. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you.
And now we are going to do a deep dive into 2 states, California and Illinois, and talk through some case studies and some lessons learned from both. So as many of you know, California was home to the first mayor-led guaranteed income demonstration in the country. Under the leadership of Mayor Michael Tubbs, 125 Stockton residents were provided with $500 a month and no strings attached cash for 24 months. So many of you know the acronym C, the Stockton Economic Empowerment Demonstration, ended in 2021, and we do have the initial results from the randomized control trial of that project. Here to talk to us about the work around guaranteed income in California is Sarah Kimberlin. She is Senior Policy Analyst at the California Budget and Policy Center, where she focuses on economic security and housing needs and policies. Her work examines how Californians meet their basic needs through employment and public supports, including safety net programs and refundable tax credits, and how, of course, public policies can be improved to close gaps, be more equitable, and help more Californians make ends meet. The floor and the microphone is yours, Sarah.
Thanks, Dorian, and thanks so much for inviting the Budget Center to be included in this event and in this work on guaranteed income, which we at the Budget Center definitely think is really important. I'll just to introduce sort of the Budget Center and our work in this area, I'll just briefly say that California Budget and Policy Center, we're a nonprofit research and analysis organization. We focus specifically on policies, particularly state level policies in California that affect Californians with low and moderate incomes, and also think carefully about issues of racial equity and other equity dimensions in terms of how policies and conditions in the world block people from participating in and sharing in the state's prosperity. So guaranteed income is an important issue that we focused on because of the ways that the key principles from guaranteed income can be really important for informing policies broadly, we think. So we focused especially on some of the key ideas, including inclusivity, the idea that all people should have access to the support they need to meet their basic needs. Autonomy, the idea that people should be trusted and respected to make their own decisions about how best to meet their needs. And so this is the key reason that we're really interested in the idea of guaranteed income, is focusing on unrestricted cash. And then also simplicity, or the idea that support should be provided to people in ways that are streamlined and easy to access, that our systems of support and our policies should be oriented towards helping people access the support they need and making it as easy as possible when people need support, and not instead not putting up barriers to block people from accessing support, which historically and currently is often how our systems can function. So what's really exciting in California right now is that there are a lot of policy proposals that are on the table and are moving through the policy process right now that really build on these kinds of key values of guaranteed income. And so I just want to highlight a few examples. So right now, just a few examples to put out there. There's a number of policies that focus on expanding unrestricted cash for people and for people in California. And these are, there's a broad range of these. So some of these, one example, for example, that is maybe the closest to the sort of core idea of guaranteed income is a proposal to provide a monthly cash payment for youth who are homeless, so who are exiting high school and meet the definition of homelessness. This would create a program to provide monthly cash payments to high school graduates in the summer before they enter a higher education program. It's a really exciting policy that we're following. And there's also a number of other policies that similarly provide focus on expanding the unrestricted cash that's provided through state policy. So these range from everything from boosting the California Earned Income Tax Credit, providing a one-time cash payment to families with children who have lost access to the federal child tax credit, providing a new tax credit for young adults who are former foster youth, providing monetary relief to undocumented workers who are out of work and who are excluded from traditional unemployment benefits, establishing baby bonds for children in foster care or children whose parents have died from COVID-19, boosting our SSP payments. These are the payments that are paired with federal SSI payments to support low-income seniors and people with disabilities, increasing CalWorks grants. That's our state welfare to work program, our TANF program. So these are all different kinds of examples of proposals that are moving through the policy process right now that really focus on getting more cash into the hands of people with low incomes who need that support, and who are who have been affected throughout the pandemic most deeply, and who continue to be the Californians who are most affected by economic need right now. And then, there are also a number of proposals that I think are really important that are not necessarily focused on unrestricted cash support, but do address other of the core values of guaranteed income. So including autonomy, including inclusivity, including simplicity. And so these include things like we have proposals to address the gaps in our safety net programs that exclude Californians who are undocumented from support, to make those supports more inclusive. They include proposals to maintain or reinstate some of the really important streamlining and simplification of access to programs that were put in place during the pandemic that allowed people to keep their health coverage without having to submit a lot of complicated recertification paperwork and those kinds of things. And that would end the work requirement for our state young child tax credit. Right now, families are required to show that they have at least $1 of earnings, which, is really, it ends up being a sort of an administrative hoop to jump through that can block people from accessing that support. So those are just some of the examples of the types of proposals that are moving through the policy process right now, and the kinds of things that we're following closely as we watch, all the policy work that relates to guaranteed income in California.
Great, thanks so much, Sarah. And can you stay with us, because what I want to do is bring in our next speaker into the conversation to talk to us about Illinois, and then we'll do a Q&A with both you and Jenna around the respective programs and policies that are moving in both states. So stay with us for a second. If you have questions for Sarah, please put them in the chat. As you have questions for our next guest, also please put them in the chat, because we're going to have plenty of time for conversation. So next, we're going to turn our attention to our second case study of Illinois. And as many of you have heard over the past few months, Illinois has been in the headlines for two very large American Rescue Plan funded demonstrations, one in Chicago reaching 5,000 families, and one in Cook County, which is a bit, for those of you that don't know, which encompasses Chicago and a bit more than just the city limits. And that guaranteed income program is $42 million, as we heard President Preckwinkle just say, in ARPA funds, and a commitment to building for sustainability. The city of Evanston, right north of the city of Chicago, has an upcoming demonstration that uses both public and private funds. These amazing programs join other philanthropically funded programs like that run by our friends and partners at Equity and Transformation Chicago. And then just this week, Illinois had a major earned income credit victory, which was a hard-fought, multi-year campaign to win a major step on the way to guaranteed income. So we're going to turn to someone from the Economic Security for Illinois team to learn more about this. I'm honored to introduce Jenna Severson, Communications and Digital Manager, and she's going to talk to us about all the amazing wins we've seen in Illinois. So Jenna, the mic is yours.
Thank you so much, Dorian. Hopefully I'm going to share my screen here. So let me just do that now. And hopefully it's going to work for all of us. I am seeing head nods that we can see it. Yes. Yeah. Okay. Thank you again, Dorian. I feel like I am in an incredibly fortunate position because pretty much every day throughout the course of my work, I get to interact with the incredible teams at Shriver and at Economic Security Project. So our work wouldn't be possible without either of those two groups. So it's an incredible honor to be part of this work today in this webinar. So thank you to our closest partners for getting us in the loop. As Dorian mentioned, I'm Jenna Severson. I'm from Economic Security Project. And in the presentation and the focus on Illinois today, rather than focus on like how we won or excuse me, rather I'm focusing like what we won, I'm going to focus on why I think kind of how we won happened. So if you know our team, our itty bitty 3-person team, it's myself, my colleagues Amber and Harish. You might have seen Harish around a time or two when it pertains to this work. But our organization, Economic Security for Illinois, is a small, young organization that has one real goal, and that is to make Illinois' economy the most inclusive and equitable in the country. And we do that right now through entertaining the ideas around cash policy and getting more money into people's hands and respecting the dignity that they have inherent in their ability to make decisions for themselves. So we run some coalitions and specifically two, but one really around this EITC work. So important to this win is actually, I'm going to back us up to sort of our origin. We've had a 3-year organization, so it's a short story, but we came together out of a task force report in Chicago. It was a Chicago Resilient Families Task Force. Group of people came together and said, like, hey, we really shouldn't have this much economic security in our city. What can we do about it? And some policy recommendations were brought forth, and they included expanding the EITC, creating a guaranteed income pilot for the city of Chicago, and then looking at other social safety net type policies. So from the very beginning, from that task force report, our organization was born just to make sure that we were the organization partnering with the groups already on the ground, working toward these policy solutions. So in 3 years since, we've been able to secure, specifically lately, secure a lot of wins. But that was the goal from the start, was how do we get more cash in people's hands? And we saw the EITC, we actually thought the earned income credit using as Darrick introduced at the beginning of the call, using the existing tool of the tax system, we thought that that was the place that we were going to start. However, as we all know, in 2020, the world got turned up on its head, and the urgency of our fight toward an earned income credit turned into how we try and get cash out now. So some of these have been talked about, and President Preckwinkle did a great job explaining Cook County's one-time cash transfer. But just to put it into perspective, we have had about $112 million in one-time direct cash in Illinois as a response to the pandemic. So we put together a private and publicly funded Give Together Now fund that was for restaurant workers early in the pandemic. We partnered with the city of Chicago. They got out cash. It was not unrestricted like a guaranteed income is. It was restricted to housing, but it was still $33 million in direct cash. Cook County's program, as President Preckwinkle explained, and then also the state gave about $65 million, and of that, $20 million was for direct cash, and that was specifically for groups that were not included in stimulus and other forms of cash assistance. And then that moves us to, again, we thought the EITC win was going to happen, but before that happened, we were very fortunate to have 4 incredible guaranteed income pilots emerge through, they're all in the Chicagoland area. So there's the city of Evanston, and that's a $1 million public-private partnership. There's the Chicago Resilient Communities pilot. There's going to be some news about that today and how it's moving forward and launching. It's $31.5 million. It's the most residents who will be included in a pilot in anywhere in the nation. There is the Chicago Futures Fund, which is a private pilot that has the specific goal of trying to benefit people who have been harmed by the war on drugs in a West Side community here in the city. So it's really cool to see that like targeted impact. And then as we've heard about Cook County's pilot, that will be the largest in the nation at $42 million, and excitingly will be created toward a permanent solution, created with the intent of making it a permanent solution. So as I mentioned, I'm here to talk about EITC, but actually all of these cash wins together with the stimulus checks, the child tax credit, they were kind of, in a way, what propelled us to look at our state legislature and say, hey, it's time to really expand the earned income credit here in Illinois. So our EITC is called EIC, just a naming convention, but it's the EITC for Illinois. And what we were able to win this past Friday was an expansion to the earned income tax credit that would include almost 1 million Illinois residents in benefits. And there were 3 groups of workers that were specifically excluded. Right now, our EITC, or previously our EITC, was structured in the exact same way as the federal EITC. It was an 18% match with all of the same eligibility criteria. And the groups of workers who pay taxes who were excluded from that relief were young workers who are 18 to 24 and don't have kids, older adults 65 and older, again without dependents, And then the largest chunk and the most impacted group would be taxpayers who file with an ITIN number, which is just a different 9-digit number that you use when you file your Social Security, or excuse me, when you file your taxes. So instead of a Social Security number, it's an ITIN number. Otherwise, they pay the same taxes. So part of our win this year was we included all 3 groups permanently in the earned income credit. So we definitely think that that's the crowning part of the event. We were also able to increase the credit amount. So as I mentioned, we matched the federal earned income tax credit at 18%. We bumped it up to 20%. And we also secured a one-time cash payment to families. So families earning, it's like income eligible. The threshold is pretty high. It's $400,000 for joint filers and $200,000 for individuals. You get $50 for each individual and then $100 for each child. We were fighting for a child tax credit, a permanent child tax credit. We will continue to fight there, but we were happy to see the way that the dynamic has changed and the embrace that we've seen throughout Chicagoland and now in the state of Illinois toward seeing what cash can do and seeing how cash is a powerful policy and what it's able to help people accomplish. So as I mentioned, I'm going to talk about how this happened, and I cannot do that. Oh, excuse me. So sorry, the benefit first. The benefit is 4.5 million people will see a benefit from this earned income credit expansion. That's hundreds of dollars in relief. And so of that 4.5 million, that includes almost 2 million kids that are going to benefit. It's families that haven't been able to see the benefits of the tax system before that are now included. And now I could not talk about this win as ours because it's really the coalition's win. So the thing that is really important to us when we're centering our work is this group that came together to make it possible. So you can see here, all of these different logos represent the groups that are part of our coalition. There's actually a few more who joined last minute, but there's over 40 groups in the Illinois Cost of Living Refund Coalition, also known as the Coalition to Make EIC Work. They're a diverse group of organizations. We've got unions and organized labor there. We've got immigrants' rights groups. There's racial justice groups. You can see Shriver and ESP both represented, but there's also community organizing and grassroots organizations that bring people who are most impacted by our fights to the table. You also see some groups that happen, like there's an affiliate probably in every state in the nation. So your AARPs, your United Ways. Here in the state of Illinois, Heartland Alliance is a very large nonprofit. So we brought all these groups together and said, like, let's continue to fight because we know this is a policy that will work for people. My colleague, Amber Wilson, who is our statewide coalition manager, can tell you it's not an easy thing to get 40 groups together and say, let's fight for the same thing and to agree on tactics. But one thing that we could always find agreement on is who we need to center. And when we were fighting, we were centering the voices of our community leaders. And you can see here, I have one of the leaders' testimonies featured and another's op-ed featured, but we engaged community leaders from the start of the process all the way throughout. In that report that I mentioned in 2019, community leaders who were directly impacted were included in the report. They were included in early on when we were developing our campaign plan. We had listening sessions with the grassroots organizations and their leaders. And we hosted them and to find out really how they're thinking about economic insecurity and what they wanted from policies. And so from design to promotion, we included these leaders. That meant that they were at, as I mentioned, listening sessions, but we also hosted town halls. We included them in media opportunities like op-eds and interviews. We hosted events. There was a 100-person rally that we had in Chicago this year. And we found places to put their stories. There's stories on our website. There are stories in print. And there was also opportunities for those leaders to come and meet directly with legislative leaders. So that work is really like the work of the coalition, how we think it got us to win, because we were able to keep them in the process the entire time and keep them front of mind. So it wasn't me who was telling a legislator how important that this policy was going to be in their life. It's Susanna, who you see speaking here, was able to say it in her own words to this legislator. So that was really one of the crowning achievements. It took a lot of effort. Building a coalition is not a small feat. You saw that, our team is small, it's the three of us, but really we had all 40 partners in the fight. And part of this, in terms of the structure, the way that we laid things out, we made sure that those grassroots groups who were bringing leaders to the table, that they were compensated. So we had sub-grants where we gave money to those partners. We also made sure that if we were using somebody's time, who was going to be a storyteller, that we were compensating them for their time. And that was part of the reason that we tried to, over 3 years, we built trust. It took a long time. And we were really fortunate to have some incredible leaders, but it's one of our favorite parts of our achievement was how we were able to keep community at the center. Unfortunately, some of the photos aren't showing, but this is just some more moments where you can see these are throughout the 3 years. We have some incredible leaders who were able to stand alongside us, and whether it was national news or local news, or writing their own op-eds, meeting with, this is one of our leaders meeting with Senator Durbin, and these stories have such a central part of our fight. So my recommendation, we didn't think that we would be at the EIC win after all of the cash, but I can say for both the cash victories and the EITC victories, we couldn't have done it without centering and without having the power of those community members and bringing them into the fold throughout the fight. So thanks again for letting me take some of your time to talk about Illinois' success. And I hope that we have much more success to share with you in the future.
Great. Thanks so much, Jenna. To hear about that success is really striking. And while we bring back, you're going to stay here, we're going to bring back Sarah and Nolan for Q&A. I do want to point out, given what we've heard thus far, I just want to remind people of two things from last year. In addition to all the pilots around guaranteed income, in addition to the state and local advocacy around expanding tax credits, remember last year we did, for a while, 6 months, have the expanded child tax credit, which, as we know the numbers, 3.7 million children lifted from poverty. That was a policy choice and a political choice. And then, of course, thrown back into poverty at the beginning of this year when the CTC expired. So we have a fight on our hands there. But the other point about last year is it was the 25th anniversary of so-called welfare reform. And I really want to remind everyone here of that important point, because Democratic president signed that into law using, frankly, rhetoric and discourse adopted from Ronald Reagan and the welfare queen tropes that we know all about. We are a far place from 1996. We are a pretty far place from welfare reform. And in fact, in many ways, we're on the offense and no longer in the defensive crouch. So the question is, how do we keep all of this going and building base and support for these programs across the country and federally? So with that, with my little editorial, I have a question for each of you actually here to get us going. And then please put your questions in the chat and we'll get to as many of them as we can. For Sarah, can you talk to us about elements of emerging programs in the sense of what aspects of guaranteed income do you think are important to study or evaluate that adds to the existing body of research that makes the case that guaranteed income is effective public policy? For Jenna, achieving the ultimate goal of a permanent guaranteed income at the federal level is going to take a mass movement led by people who are most directly affected. So talk to us about some of the strategies people are using at the local level in Chicago and in Illinois to engage with community members, to organize community folks, those directly affected, regarding policies to help meet their basic needs. And then for Nolan, the report talks a lot about implementing a permanent publicly funded guaranteed income through three different mechanisms: creation of a new program, a potential dividend from a sovereign wealth fund like the Alaska dividend, permanent dividend, and then third, expansion of a state earned income credit. So I want you to talk to us about all three of these options and which one of the three stand out as particularly attractive to you, and maybe that varies by state. So whoever wants to go first, I just threw a lot at you. Whoever wants to go first, and remember to put your questions in the chat, and we're going to get to as many as we can. And Jenna, looks like you're chomping at the bit, so why don't you go first?
Oh yeah, I'm still off mute. Didn't realize. Sorry, everybody. Well, I think I am not experienced in national movement building. I would almost, Dorian, say, what do you think? Because you're certainly a leader in this space. But what I can say is learning from this experience, Community building and ensuring that you are keeping community at the center is in itself like a full-time job of the coalition to do. So the thing I think was most successful for us was when we made sure that the diversity of our partnerships included groups that had the expertise of community organizing at the center. So obviously, like we know that organized labor unions are really good at this, but there's also groups on the ground. I think I highlighted 2 of Kofi's leaders. There's groups on the ground that do work really well with communities. But the investment there, I think one of the most important things that we did, in the thing that I see differently from other nonprofit partnerships that I've been part of in the state of Illinois, is that we invested in those groups directly. So as a coalition leader, we invested in them so that they could then invest in their leaders. A lot of times people just ask people to show up and they're not giving anything in return. So that would be kind of my top line piece, is just making sure that you're doing the investment and you're also recognizing the amount of work that community organizing entails. And so you're really finding the experts in the field. That expertise is not something that we could have probably as a 3-person organization brought up in 3 years. So we really leaned on groups who are already doing it on the ground.
Thanks, Jenna. Sarah, let's hear from you next, and then we'll come to you, Nolan.
Sure. Yeah, Dorian, so you asked if I could talk a little bit about what aspects of programs are important to do some more research on to help make the case of the effectiveness of guaranteed income, and especially in the policy context, which I think is such a great question, because there are a lot of opportunities right now, I think, to do that kind of work. And I'll say, particularly thinking about what it means to implement guaranteed income at the state level, or similarly in some ways at the local level. I think one really key aspect of one really powerful thing that guaranteed income can do is help to close gaps in access to resources and in access to opportunities that have disadvantaged certain groups of people. And so I think there's a big opportunity to focus on how guaranteed income is helpful for specific populations and specific groups. That there's a real opportunity at the state level to target policies in a more narrow way, in terms of being able to move forward policies that are really realistic from a financial perspective and can make a really transformative difference for the people that they're reaching. So I think that's one piece that I would say is important to think about, is to be able to pull out information about when programs have been targeted to meet the needs of particular groups of individuals or households or communities, to be able to show that targeting was done in a deliberate and thoughtful way, and then to document what the effects are of that. I think that's one aspect that I think is really relevant and important. And then I'll say one of the things I was glad to see in the report that you released is just a lot of attention to how guaranteed income can work with other types of safety net supports or public supports. I think that's an area where, again, there are challenges, but there are also solutions. And so figuring out, like, what are the approaches that work, and what are the approaches that work for certain in certain situations. It's a lot of these, there's trade-offs in terms of how you structure things. So just producing more information and sharing more information about what worked for whom and where is another place where, because I think it is so important that, especially when you're talking about state policy or local policy, that you really keep in mind making sure that guaranteed income supports are working with other safety net supports, other public supports, and are closing gaps and are increasing the total resources that people have. So figuring out the best ways to do that as we kind of workshop that in real life, I think that's really important as well.
So Nolan, I'm actually going to pick up where Sarah just left and add another question to the initial one I asked you, and because it's such an important point, and I really want you to talk about why you focus in the report precisely on how this supplements other safety net programs. At Community Change, we've spent years fighting to protect SNAP, Medicaid, low-income housing assistance, all the things that low-income and working class folks need. So talk to us both about why you wanted to emphasize that in the report, that this is actually an added, right? It's not mutually exclusive from existing safety net programs. And then the question really about the 3 mechanisms or pathways to a permanent publicly funded guaranteed income program.
Yeah, so maybe what I'll do is I'll start there by going through just some of the three mechanisms that we highlight in the report and talk about some of the particular advantages there might be from going with a particular one. But I do want to say that, these are three that they're being tried, so we wanted to definitely uplift them, but there may very well be others. I mean, one of the great things about this really rich guaranteed income community of practice that ESP is helping build, and just a lot of the really imaginative and innovative folks in this space, is that they're always pushing boundaries in different ways to try to figure out how to get resources to people. So there may very well be other ways. When I think about something like an expansion of the earned income credit, like we're seeing happening in Illinois, one of the advantages of that approach that really sticks out is it is this existing mechanism that already is very effective, right? So there's not a ton of really hard implementation work that has to be done to try to build something new. There's this existing thing. And on the benefits protection piece, this is an approach that for some programs, it's not a perfect pill, but for some programs, these types of payments are already exempt from consideration. So, from that perspective of protecting benefits, going with this type of approach to get people cash, there's some built-in positive impacts there. I think with the second approach that we highlight, this dividend from a sovereign wealth fund, I think the advantage there really is about the revenue raising piece. And, these are big programs, they're expensive. And that's the first thing that, policymakers and decision makers are always going to ask about. How much does it cost? Where's the money going to come from? But what I do really like, and it's been picked up in the chat a little bit already here, and I'm glad people are picking up on this, is that getting these types of sovereign wealth funds to perform well in the market may mean investment in public dollars being invested in some of the forces that as advocates, we often find ourselves at odds with. And so we want to be honest about that and saying that is something that folks should be considering and thinking about. But really the revenue raising piece, I think for the dividend part is a particular advantage. And then building a new program there, it's really just about flexibility. It gives advocates and designers of the program the best ability to play with things like payment frequency, payment amounts, and then to try to integrate with the existing benefits administration infrastructure to see if there might be pathways for things like express lane eligibility or categorical eligibility, using the information that we already gather on folks to make integration into a guaranteed income program a little bit easier and a little bit less administratively burdensome for clients. And I think this point, and it's been mentioned a lot in the chat already, that people are hyper focused on this. And then when we talk to folks on our community advisory board, this is the number one thing that they're concerned about, is this piece protecting other benefits. It's huge. And before I started doing this work, my work was also SNAP advocacy work in Illinois. So deeply invested in trying to protect these benefits, because ultimately, like I said, we want folks to experience a net gain. I mean, I think it's really hard to make the argument that someone is better off if they're given $1,000 a month, let's say, but then they lose their Medicaid or they lose their housing benefits. So really making sure that those things aren't in jeopardy is a critical piece of this, because we have to ensure that people are better supported and that people are better off as a result of these programs.
So let me ask you a quick follow-up, I think to you, Nolan, as well as Sarah, Jen, if you want to jump in. This is a question asked by Nick Federici. So in the absence of a federal program, how can we at least get federal waivers to allow a clear playing field for state and local programs regarding income or asset limitations? And Nick goes on to say the risk of clients potentially losing eligibility for Medicaid, SNAP, HUD, low-income housing assistance, et cetera, currently seems like a big hurdle to providing direct cash assistance. So if you can talk specifically about the waivers that might be possible. And then there's another question to all of you, and I might even jump in here too, for my colleague, Dewan Walsh from Community Change, who asked the question around California, which in particular is in the process of implementing reparations for descendants of slavery, similar to the city of Evanston, Illinois. can or has the issue of reparations been considered in discussions around guaranteed income? So I'll throw those two in the pot and we'll collect a few more questions. But if anyone wants to take the first one.
Yeah, I'm happy to just jump in the piece about the waivers. You know, we go through it in some detail in the report and in the appendices, folks will see. I mean, it can get pretty wonky when we talk about what are the different options that a state might have. But, you know, first and foremost, you need your state to play ball. I mean, if you're in a state that is typically a little more hostile toward its public benefits recipients, I mean, they might not even be working with you to request those waivers. I mean, so that is the first point. You also need the federal government to cooperate. I think right now, you know, the chances of that, then let's say the chances of that happening maybe 4 years ago are a little bit better. And who knows what's going to happen in the future. So, you know, both of those pieces is you need your state to really be invested in trying to protect those benefits. And then you need the federal agencies to really do that too. And I think in the report, you know, we try to lay out our best bet as far as all of these. And I want to make clear we don't have all the answers on the benefits protection piece, because there are some areas where I think we're going to need federal agencies to give a little bit more guidance and interpret their own regulations around what exactly do we count as income, and how exactly that income can affect eligibility in certain ways. So I will say it's not all doom and gloom. I mean, it is a hurdle, but what I think the point we're trying to make in the report is there are tactics that are already available to folks to try to protect more benefits than maybe you might think. But certainly there's more work to be done.
Sarah, Jenna, do you want to jump in on any of these?
I'll just say on the conversation about reparations, I think the work that the task force in California has been doing on reparations, I would just say for anyone who's interested in how the sort of intersection of cash and racial equity and practical implementation issues and all that fits together, it's been a lot of really interesting discussions going on in that task force. I don't know about directly connecting it to guaranteed income, but I think it's definitely, there's a lot of important issues that are being discussed there. So I encourage people to look into that and follow what's going on in those conversations.
And I can just,
Go ahead, Jenna.
from the perspective of Illinois on reparations, I do think it's something that we're certainly very excited about. And Evanston, as you mentioned, Dorian, is looking toward reparations. They did a housing specific reparations piece this past year. But one of the things that I think that we recognize as economic security for Illinois, and I'm not the leader of our organization, my colleague Harish is not a person who is a Black person who can speak to that issue in the way that having a coalition led by Black people for Black people is something that is really important. So we are more than happy to chime in and be supportive when that work takes hold. And we do know, we already mentioned today, Equity and Transformation, which is a really amazing organization here in Chicago that is hoping to lead that work and move the state toward reparations. They're also doing work, exciting work around reparations at the city level. So we are, I would say, tune in to the work that they're doing because they're leading in really cool ways, and we're happy to support them. And hopefully that campaign can just grow and flourish, and we can have some more victories to tell you about in the future.
I'll double click on that, Jenna, and just say follow Equity and Transformation, who are doing cutting edge work and thinking about reparations and guaranteed income at the same time. They don't have to be mutually exclusive. And in fact, some of us were thinking about this many years ago when neither guaranteed income or reparations was even remotely at the center of the conversation. And a lot has changed and a lot has moved in the last 5, 6, 7 years. But that takes organizing to bend political will and get the support necessary for either of those. What I used to think of in 2015 as the two most controversial ideas in American politics. And here we are in a different place on both of those issues right now in 2022. So a lot more organizing to do. Let me ask another question. This is for any of you from Regina Anderson. And the question is, we work with young people in higher education all across the US at Food Recovery Network to recover surplus food to donate to neighbors experiencing hunger. We loved working with ESP and Madeline. Many of our student leaders do not have kids, and the child tax credit doesn't quite yet feel relevant to them. Any suggestions on petitions or legislation we can share with them to begin to build their advocacy muscle to support the economic security of their neighbors? They are already volunteering to help ensure that folks have food. So anybody who wants to take a crack at that question.
I would say the child tax credit was expanded this past year, but also one of the things that the federal government did was they expanded so the way that we wanted the earned income credit to be expanded, those three groups, the I-10 filers, 18 to 24-year-olds, and 65 plus without dependents, those are childless. The 18 to 24 and 65 plus are childless workers who would be specifically impacted. And so there is still the possibility to connect to what federal relief brought that group. So one, that's kind of a plug to make sure that people file their taxes this year, because they might be eligible for more money than they think. But two, I think that plus the stimulus check is really a way to bring up in somebody's mind how important that money is. And yes, the child tax credit was amazing, but there were still other examples this past year of ways that federal relief money impacted people's lives.
Yeah, that's another question to all of you, pretty open-ended. What additional resources are out there that would benefit advocates pursuing a guaranteed income in their state? What else you got for us besides this fine report?
The Guaranteed Income Community of Practice. Madeline is on the call right now. She's co-chair along with Aisha, and I'm sure there's other co-chairs on this call that I can't even think of right now. But there's a whole slew of resources that are available at gicp.info, and I turn to it all the time. When we get asked questions all the time about guaranteed income, and really I'm pretending I know what I'm talking about, but I'm really just looking up these resources. So there's just an absolute treasure trove there. So that would be one place I would point.
Yeah, I'll say similarly in California, there's a really broad, deep community of people and an organized community of practice focused on guaranteed income. I'll see if I can drop the link into the chat. That'd be helpful. And I see people on this webinar who are actively leaders in that community. So definitely there's a lot of people to connect with and a lot of resources there. And I know Economic Security Project has been involved in helping to support those efforts as well. So
yeah, and I'll shift from just talking about the community of practice to, again, doubling down on the importance of the community generally. I mean, this is a theory of change that's been echoed already, and it's one that I believe in wholeheartedly and really subscribe to, which is that these are big shifts that we're talking about, and it is going to take a mass movement led by people in order to accomplish this. So if you're an advocate in a state and you feel like you don't have those types of meaningful connections or meaningful relationships with directly impacted people, I really think it's very important to try to build those and try to conspire with people who are in need of this stuff and who know best what policies and what their needs are, because otherwise it's just not going to happen. So I really appreciate that point has been made already a few times today, and just want to echo it from us at the Shriver Center that this needs to be driven by folks who would benefit from it. And you know, that's something that we are looking forward to hopefully seeing not only in Illinois, but nationally as well.
Great. Okay, last question, and this is what we're going to do. So I'm going to give you each a minute to say what you want to say to the folks on this webinar. What do you want to leave people with in terms of guaranteed income in the states? What the one or two things you want people to know walking away from this call? So Nolan, I'm going to start with you, then Sarah, and then Jenna, and then we'll start to close.
The thing, we can win right now. We can win now. I mean, that is the thing. I think in places like Illinois and places like California, they're proving it. I mean, we can do this. Now is the time. I think there's been all this tremendous momentum that has been percolating up from the local level. And it's really long overdue for us to think bigger. Dorian mentioned that it's been 25 years since welfare reform. It is time for us to now wholeheartedly and fully reject that logic permanently and forever. We've got to shift course, and now is the time. So I think the folks that we work with, they're sick of waiting. And I know there are a lot of folks here on the call that are sick of waiting. So I really want folks to be thinking about this stuff right now, because now it's happening.
Yeah, I think I might echo a similar point. Just there are a lot of policies moving right now. I can speak at least in California. There are a lot of policies moving right now that really would enact important principles of guaranteed income, and just a lot of advocates and coalitions and the guaranteed income community of practice. Just a lot of, organized work that can be tapped into and connected with in order to help move a lot of these ideas forward. And I mean that broadly too. I mean, there are very specific things that have the name guaranteed income in them. And then there are other policies that really relate directly to a lot of the key principles of guaranteed income, include like making things more inclusive and more accessible, expanding cash support through a variety of different kinds of policies. So there's a lot that can be done right now, I think.
I can also just say ditto to everything Nolan said. It's a really exciting moment. So I would say you have what you need in front of you, most likely. Look at the groups who are already on the ground and learn from them, learn from their leadership and bring them into the fold, and invest there. Invest in the community members who are already calling for this, and that those voices will grow. I would also say one thing that I didn't mention that has been really important to us too is having the data to back up. So this report is a great feature. So I'm really thankful that this report is able to ground the rest of the fights. But I would say invest in the seeds that are already planted in your community around you, and look to the leadership on the ground.
Great. Well, thank you to Nolan, to Sarah, to Jenna, to President Preckwinkle. And I'm going to close us out with just a couple of brief points. The first is I mentioned earlier, last year was the 25th anniversary of so-called welfare reform. This year is another anniversary. It is the 50th anniversary of something probably a lot of you don't know about, called the National Black Political Convention, held just across the border from Illinois in Gary, Indiana. And it's also important to lift this up because as part of that convention, which was a moment of unifying very diverse traditions in Black politics and then the Black freedom movement, to create an agenda. And out of that agenda 50 years ago, March 72, out of that agenda was a demand for guaranteed annual income. And I raise that because I want people to understand, just in case you haven't done the reading, this has been an idea that has been around a long time. So I want to name check National Black Political Convention. Of course, I want to name check the National Welfare Rights Organization, and particularly lift up the leadership of one of our homies who's here, Aisha Yandoro, who's been doing this work in Jackson, Mississippi for years. This is an idea that a lot of working class, poor Black women had a long time ago. They're the ones that pushed Dr. King to come out publicly around this idea in 67 and 68. So I just want to give visibility to another tradition around this idea of guaranteed income, and especially on this 50th anniversary of that really big demand. We are in a moment here in 2022 where we can make headway on some big transformative policies around guaranteed income, not just at the local level, but at the state level. And hopefully we can win something at the national level. But to do that, and yes, we are on offense, it feels like. To do that, we have to keep going. We have to keep the organizing going, the research going, the narrative work going, the policy work going, the advocacy going. All the things are required. It's all hands on deck in this moment to really, really, really push the envelope on this idea and this issue and to change people's lives in this country. So with that, I just want to say, Pedro, thank you. Madeline, thank you to the ESP team, to the community change team, and of course to the Shriver Center team. The report is fantastic. I would encourage all of you to read it, share it out, talk about it. And just so you know, Pedro from ESP will be following up with you on strategy for 2023 state sessions. He also holds office hours, which is near and dear to my heart as a former professor. Pedro has office hours on Tuesdays from 2 to 3 p.m. Find him. There'll be a link in the chat if you want to talk to him about anything and everything guaranteed income in the States. And with that, thank you all so much for joining us, and we'll see you next time.